I'd like to welcome today Michael Healy, who is the outgoing Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group. Michael, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
So, Michael, now that your tenure as Executive Director of BISG has come to an end, it'd be great if you could let us know a little bit about your time at BISG and your thoughts going forward. But before we go there, perhaps for those of us who don't know what the Book Industry Study Group is, maybe you could tell a little bit about it.
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. BISG was established a little over 30 years ago now, and is a membership organisation and a not-for-profit body dedicated to improving the efficiency of the supply chain in our industry, and we do that through a number of ways, through standards, best practices, independent research, education and information. And we provide those services to the entire US book industry, but as I say, it's principally a membership-based organisation.
And when you say the supply chain, I've heard a lot about at your various conferences about the book industry supply chain. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's the process of getting the works of authors into the hands of readers and all the intermediate stages in between. So the supply chain of our industry encompasses that process. And what's so unique about BISG, unlike any other trade association that operates in the US industry, is we draw our membership not from one constituency, not just from publishers, from booksellers or from librarians, but from every link in the chain. So today, BISG's membership consists of printers, book manufacturers, retailers of all kinds, publishers, librarians' bodies, and all the trade associations that are well known in the US book industry.
So what would you say have been the highlights of the last 3 years now that your tenure has come to an end?
Probably someone else should judge what the highlights have been, but from my perspective, the industry in the United States has changed enormously in the course of those 3 years. And really, when I look back on my tenure in this organisation, what I'm pleased about is taking BISG in some new directions, particularly, for example, in the area of digital publishing. When I arrived back in 2006, digital and electronic publishing were even more embryonic than they are today. But in the course of those 3 years, of course, digital has become such a strong feature on the landscape of our industry. So I'm delighted to have moved BISG to looking at the new digital supply chain, assessing what standards and best practices may be necessary for the new world going forward. Secondly, I did a survey of our membership when I first arrived and asked them where they wanted BISG to deploy its focus and its attention. And not surprisingly, digital was number one on the list, but a very close second was this whole area of environmental and social responsibility of our industry. And I'm very pleased that through the commitment of the office and a lot of volunteers, we were able to do some real pioneering work in the area of sustainability and environmental best practice. And we did our first research report on the carbon footprint of our industry. So when I look back, I think of these new directions, digital, environmental, as well as building a lot on the more conventional supply chain work that we've been doing for well over 30 years.
So I have to ask you before we go on, you're from Brooklyn, right?
You can tell. A little further east than that, absolutely. I'm from the UK, and I came to New York 3 years ago specifically for this job, absolutely.
Okay, just had to ask. You've talked a little bit about how the industry has changed in the last 3 years, mainly on the digital front. And I suppose the next question is where you see publishing evolving over the next 12 months?
Sure. Well, I think the next 12 months, in some respects, will be broadly similar to the last 12 months. In the past 12 months, we've seen various facets of digital publishing starting to mature in our industry. And most of the attention-grabbing headlines in the past 12 months have been in this area of digital publishing. And I'd be very surprised if that changes in the course of the next 12 months. In fact, I'd imagine that will simply intensify. Now, people argue that perhaps a disproportionate amount of time is spent in our industry focusing on an area of our work which today, at least in the trade sector, probably amounts for 2% of all the revenue that we raise. But I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. It's very clear that our industry is evolving along digital lines, and that there's no facet of our industry, whether it's how books are produced, marketed, sold, priced, and even read, no facet of our industry is going to remain unaffected by these digital developments. So they will only intensify going forward, and we're going to continue to see passionate debates about the right way to deliver electronic content to consumers to meet their changing needs. We're going to see passionate debate about how books ought to be priced appropriately in this new era. We're going to see passionate debate about how we protect that digital content against piracy and unauthorized use. So the debates about pricing, the debates about digital rights management are simply going to intensify. But something new is being born here. Our traditional supply chain is giving way to something new. And an organization like BISG, which has been demonstrating its relevance for 30 years, must continue to demonstrate its relevance for this new era, and I have every confidence that it will do so going forward because it has so much to give.
And in fact, wanted to ask, you've been a widely respected, universally, I should say, respected part of the book industry for the past 3 years. I imagine you'd be an incredibly tough act to follow. I'm wondering what advice you would have for your successor.
Well, my successor, whoever he or she may be, really does have to work that out for himself or herself, because the great thing about this job, and I really do feel it's one of the really great jobs in the book industry in North America, one of the great things about it is you get to make your mark on the organization and therefore a little on the industry. But two things come to mind. I think this job, at whichever point you take it on, is a little bit about continuity and it's a little bit about change. And it's a question of where the proportions between continuity and change actually fall. The continuity is really easy to describe. For a very long time to come, we're going to have this traditional book supply chain, printed books being made and distributed and sold and consumed in traditional ways. And that's going to continue to be in some respects, a chronically inefficient industry. So my successor will want to spend some of his or her time focusing on ways to improve that efficiency, just as I did and my predecessors did going back over 30 years. But I think the focus probably will be more on change than on continuity. The BISG Board of Directors has a major strategic review underway, and I think that's going to do a fabulous job setting the context for my successor. And you can be sure going forward that the supply chain in its widest sense, physical and digital, are going to preoccupy the efforts and attentions, not just of the new executive director by any means, but his or her staff and the key people, which is the thousands of people who volunteer their time for BISG's work.
So, Michael, before we wrap up, what's next for you?
Well, over the last few months, I've been doing two things simultaneously. One is looking at BISG's work and then working on the Book Rights Registry under the Google Book Settlement. So now I'm going to deploy myself full-time to the Book Rights Registry and the Google Book Settlement.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that, and thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. Thanks for asking me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.